I'm Bill Lupini, Superintendent of Schools here in Brookline, and with me is Peter Rowe, the Deputy Superintendent for Administration and Finance, and we're really excited to be here this evening to talk about the budget proposal that's before the school committee that was actually unveiled on Thursday, the 12th of last week. What we want to do this evening is take people through parts of that presentation, and then open it up for questions from people who are here. And I understand we have the ability to take questions via telephone as well. So we're, again, really excited to be able to offer this presentation in this format. So and again, we'll shorten pieces of this presentation in the interest of time this evening, in the interest of the hour that we know we have. But I want to start by saying that our budget is based on really the mission, the vision, the core beliefs of the school system. Can I have that? Sure. And do it. So, so we've got, and again, in the presentation, you'll find our mission statement. I don't know how you did this, Peter. Okay. Our core values of high achievement for all, excellence in teaching, collaboration, respect for human differences, and educational equity. We really have spent quite a bit of time over the last 2 years talking about specific programs in the school system and how they tie back to these values. Some examples of that would be around the class size parameters that have been established here of up to 22 students in our primary grades, up to 25 students in our intermediate and middle grades and high school classes. Some specific programs like our Enrichment and Challenge Support Program, an initiative that we're particularly excited about because of the recommendations that have come out of a program review process that's recently been completed, and what we're able to recommend in that program. Under excellence in teaching, particularly the work that's been done around our mentoring of teachers in first, second, and third year. And so, each of these areas we've really focused programs that have been built and specific focus of our budget and programming on areas that support the mission and vision of the district. Our goals, which have been recently developed in our Strategic Plan 2.0, talk about every student achieving, every student invested in their learning, every student prepared for change and challenge, and every educator growing professionally. And again, we're great believers that the budget is really the way we advance those goals of the system. We've spent a lot of time over the last year talking about how while this district continues to be very high performing, the fact is that we've seen some plateauing in terms of some of the achievement indicators that we pay particular attention to, and that we've seen some widening of gaps between students of color and students who live in lower socioeconomic and their peers, particularly over the last number of years. We believe that's because of our growth that's been associated with the increases that we've had in terms of revenue and where we've been able to dedicate those dollars. What I want to spend some time on through this presentation is really some facts and then pieces of the two different budget proposals that we've been asked to put forward. So the fact is that since 2005, our elementary enrollment's grown by 38%. The fact is that since 2005, our school district enrollment, K-12, has grown by 25%. This slide takes people through a process that's been going on around a process to look at space, process that went on with an override study committee, and that culminates in the Board of Selectmen defining two questions, one associated with operating budget and the other associated with capital, and particularly the devotion school. The override study committee raised a number of issues that we've been able to incorporate in our discussions the last couple of years. One was around use of buildings. Until last year, our buildings, there were a number of groups that used our school buildings that didn't pay any user fee, any rent for using those buildings. That included extended day. It included the Brookline Music School, Voices Boston, and our staff Children's Center. And all of those now pay a user fee, which is being fully implemented in the FY16 budget. We spent a lot of time on this, and I can do this later on if someone would like, but the number of the things that we've done in terms of tightening up the kindergarten assignment process, pushing back deadlines for when we began to assign students, and creating our Office of Student Affairs, clarifying the materials fee, which is the program that allows staff to bring their children here. All of those have come out of these processes. Early education tuitions, which we've continued to increase and monitor what the market rates are around those programs, and really the centralization and efficiency of operations, both in terms of the way we collect fees, in particular the way we collect fees and the manner in which we do student assignments, our Office of Student Affairs, and check residency. In those presentations, we've spent a lot of time on the changing nature of the student population here. This slide is a really good indication of that, in that it gives some data about our FY 2015 kindergarten class, and the fact that 256 of the 681 students, which by the way now is up to 703 students, were referred for a home language survey, which are numbers that have been building over the last number of years, that have been increasing. Of those 256 students, 161 required a language assessment, meaning there was some reason to believe that English was not their primary language to the point where they might need an intervention service. Of the 161, 154 of those students required ELL services. And those are numbers that have ticked up nearly every year for the last number of years, and further complicate the kindergarten assignment process and mean that we need more staff to provide those ELL services for students. So a couple things on the overall budget picture for FY16. We've actually seen an uptick in our enrollment during the school year of about 54 students. At the beginning of the year, we had looked at some of the grade levels, particularly at the devotion school, and seen some downturn in grades 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, I believe it was all of those. And we've actually seen an uptick during the school year of 54 students. And as I mentioned earlier, our current kindergarten has now broken 700 students. The FY16 House 1 proposal, the proposal put forward by Governor Baker, sees an increase in Chapter 70 and unrestricted general government aid of $850,000. And that was what we projected. The actual increase is somewhat larger. In circuit breaker, the funding from the state level appears to be at levels it's been in over the past number of years. However, the good news here is that because we've built programs in district, because we've been able to bring students back to the district, our actual circuit breaker costs are less. And so our filing is actually about $200,000 less than it's been in the past. Local town receipts are projected to increase by more than $800,000. And health insurance was assumed at an increase of 4%. It actually has come in closer to 8% for next year. And that required an adjustment that the town made up to 6%, and that we factored in against those increased Chapter 70 and unrestricted general government aid increases. So we have some concerns as we move forward, as we pointed out last week, in that this is all we have right now is Governor Baker's proposal. The legislative process has now begun. So we don't know what the legislature will do with Chapter 70, with unrestricted general government aid, with some other changes in structure that the governor's made to the budget. We think health insurance is at 8%. Again, that will require some movement between the town and schools in our discussions. A number of specific grants have been consolidated by the governor into one line item in his budget, which means that a grant that Brookline's depended on for some number of years, full-day kindergarten expansion, is gone. It's zeroed out in this budget, and that's a loss for us of somewhere between $250,000 and $325,000. Metco is funded at the level put forward in the FY 2015 budget, but twice during the past year we've seen both governors factor in 9C cuts to that program, meaning cuts that were made to balance the budget in mid-year. And so we're worried about that $110,000 that we lost in 9C cuts and whether it'll survive the legislative process. And then we're worried about federal grants, as always, and what the feds will do with Title I, special education, and those grants. So I'll skip through this and go to the two budgets that we were actually asked to prepare, which involved an override, what we're calling an override budget and a no override budget. An override budget which assumed $3.25 million from the town school partnership. It assumes 7.7 from an operating override, approximately 6.2 of which would be available in FY16. And it assumes an additional $2.2 million in non-tax revenue to be implemented beginning in FY17. The no override budget assumes the same $3.25 million from town school partnership, and it also assumes an additional $682,000 from the town school partnership created through municipal budget cuts. So if you look at the override spending plan, you see the town school partnership allocation, the proposed override funding for year one. Use of our reserves are about $800,000 if our projections for FY15 are correct. There'll be $800,000 left for us in reserves at the beginning of this budget year, and we've projected to budget those as $300,000, $250,000, and $250,000 over the next 3-year period, which represents actually a reduction in what we have in our current spending plan in reserves. Circuit breaker of about $1.5 million, and I said earlier that's a $200,000 reduction from our present level of circuit breaker based on our ability to file for students of high cost. We have more students in programs in our district. And building rental of an additional $75,000, which leads to revenues of $9.1 million available. And so there are many items that are actually in both of these budgets. And so this one's the one where I'll spend the most time and then go through some of the pieces in the no override plan. So we're projecting in this spending plan the need for 3 additional sections of elementary based on what we know are increasing sections, using a projection of 650 kindergartners coming in the coming year. 3 sections. We're projecting the need for additional FTE in middle level classrooms in grades 6 through 8, and elementary and middle level specialists. These are the physical education, health, performing arts, visual arts, and elementary world language teachers that provide that instruction for those elementary sections. So as the number of elementary sections and middle level sections increase, we have to increase those people to meet that need. Many of you know we're opening a new school for the next 3-year period that we're calling Upper Devotion at Old Lincoln School. This is initially grades 7 and 8 from the Devotion School, but will be, when played out in FY17, grades 5, 6, 7, and 8 in that school. And what we budgeted is $677,000, which is the cost of running a school above and beyond transferring the teachers who teach those grade levels over from the Devotion School. And then Brookline High School teachers to keep up with what's the beginning of an enrollment increase there. Enrollment-related, we've budgeted to flesh out our literacy K through 8 program. This is an initiative that started a number of years ago that, quite frankly, we've had to slow over the last number of years because of the enrollment growth. It involves bringing on literacy coaches, and its ultimate aim is to reduce the number of students in need of intervention. In many districts that have seen this model, it's actually reduced the number of students who qualify for IEPs, and there are savings down the line associated with that. Enrichment and challenge support, these are the recommendations I talked about earlier, come out of a program review committee. We're very excited about this as a programmatic initiative in that it adds ECS resource teachers, ECS administration, and math specialists to support ECS, and really takes a look at looking at better differentiating within the classroom and where necessary outside of the classroom for students in needs of those interventions. It adds math specialists to provide coaching for our teachers and intervention for our students. It allows us to implement the advisory program at the middle grades, adds before and after school supports, adds dollars to our professional learning and innovation, instructional supplies, add staffing to ELA, English language learners. I mentioned earlier that our number of students who qualify for those interventions is up. And it also allows us to address what's become a pretty interesting problem for us, and that's around screening and translation. So I showed earlier the slide showing the number of students requiring those screenings. And also, in our recent coordinated program review out of the Department of Education, we were given some very specific recommendations around translation services available to families that we want to be able to implement and can't at present. There are a number of other areas here. I mean, I'll mention a couple on this list. Early education scholarships. We know that the need for scholarships in our early education programs to provide that program for students in need of it is somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 a year. We have some, I think it's $50,000 at present available in scholarships. We've added to that in this plan. Building repair and maintenance, administration, all these things, and the vast majority of these lists, I should say this about all these lists, were included in the models that we showed to the Override Study Committee and have discussed with the school committee regularly since October of 2013. In student services, we added nurses, we added guidance counselors, we added a supportive learning center program. We're very excited about that. It's modeled after the BRIGHT model that many parents may know of at Brookline High School, which is an avenue for students to transition back to school from hospitalization, from concussions, head injuries, a multitude of areas. Been very successful at the high school. Principals have been talking with us about the need for that kind of program at the elementary level, and we're able to propose it in this model. And then response to intervention, because we believe that many of the services that we're providing currently in special education can be provided in regular education without the need for IEPs. We believe this area, while it costs money up front, as we've discussed for the last 2 years, actually saves money in the long term in that it begins to reduce those numbers. In special education, we've proposed special education teachers, particularly in our autism and language-based learning support programs at the elementary level and the high school level. We've proposed restructuring our assistive technology, which is the program that provides students with those kinds of support, service, and consultation around technology and other needs that they may have to be able to access the curriculum. It changes the administration of our home services and extended school year program. Adds BCBAs, because a few years ago we actually brought our home-based services in-house. We saved somewhere in the neighborhood, Mr. I think it was $500,000 by bringing that in-house. And the number of students, as I mentioned earlier, in that autism program has risen over the last number of years, and so we require more of those home-based services programs. And again, I'm skipping through some of these to talk for a moment about our technology plan. We put forward to the school committee, to the Override Study Committee, a discussion of a technology plan, which, as I've said over and over, is not a technology plan that will, as we've said to some people, it will knock people's socks off. Right? This is basic wiring. This is basic what a classroom looks like in 2015 plan. It puts technology in the hands of students. It puts technology in the hands of teachers that allows them access to the curriculum. It also provides some administrative supports that support parents in terms of a learning management system available at the middle level and high school, and provides adds to our collection of audio and ebooks and software licenses. Again, in the interest of time, I'll move on. But it also provides mounted projection to an additional 40 classrooms in our system. This model assumes collective bargaining is set at 2%. That is the research that we've done on what appears to be the norm in communities as we've taken a look at collective bargaining agreements. Steps and lanes, which I know a lot of people have talked about. The step and lane cost for us in this district, that is the steps that teachers move on the salary schedule, costs 2%. Slightly under 2% per year. That's the cost of that item. We've budgeted for outside placements. Grant contingency, again, not knowing what those federal grants may be. General ed contingency, if we're wrong about 650 students as we were this year, and it ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 students and we need to add additional staffing. Special ed contingency, benefit contingency, again, associated with what I talked about earlier around our benefit costs and athletics. The no override scenario assumes the $3.93 million from the town-school partnership, the same assumption in reserves that I talked about earlier, the same assumption in circuit breaker that I talked about earlier, the same assumption in building rental that I talked about earlier, but actually adds another component that would increase the cost of that building rental and or increase the cost of our early education programs and or the cost of our athletic programs to the tune of an additional $300,000, which would generate $3.9 million. Again, many of the things in the classroom teachers and supports is the same. The one that's different is that Brookline High School, we don't add the 1.2 teachers to keep up with the small growth that we're going to see at the high school next year. The other proposals, I believe, are almost identical. There are some slight changes in the upper devotion at Old Lincoln School proposal. The real changes come in things like the enrollment-related, where we do not address the math specialists, enrichment challenge support, materials and supplies, steps to success, professional learning, before and after school supports, early education scholarships, and the administrative recommendations are not included in this spending plan. We address none of the student service proposals in this plan. None of them are added nurses guidance, response to intervention, or the elementary supportive learning center. Many of the special ed pieces are included in this budget because they're enrollment driven. If we have need in the autism-based program or the language-based learning disability program, we really don't have a choice but to address those needs. They are IEP driven. And so many of these proposals are the same. We've left in the change in administration around home services and extended school year because we actually believe long term that's an efficiency to address that program that way. The technology budget in the no override scenario only adds $336,000 in spending, which essentially only does the leasing of new devices for the second phase of equitable distribution across the schools. I mean, what I didn't talk about earlier and should have is that we showed last year that the distribution of devices across buildings was quite different if you went to the Heath School versus going to the Pierce School. That's been reduced dramatically in this first year of implementation, and that is the only major focus that's left in the technology plan in the no override spending plan. We've reduced the assumption for collective bargaining here to 1% and still factored in outside placements, grant contingency, general education contingency, and added a contingency for referrals because this budget calls for 6 major changes, 6 major reductions to the tune of about $1.2 million. One of them is a classroom consolidation at the elementary level, which we've already begun to look at in terms of how that may be implemented. So we're taking a look at primarily grades 4 through 8. We're looking at what it would look like to take those classes that would assume a different model of 26 to 29 students. And then we're proposing and now exploring with the principals what that might look like to do that. All in the interest here of, in the no override scenario, consolidating 5 sections. Those consolidations, as I mentioned in this last slide, will lead to more referrals for special education. The data all show that's what happens in those kinds of larger class sizes. And so we've added a contingency to allow for that. We've also eliminated 5 positions at Brookline High School in this plan, which will increase class size or eliminate electives or reduce supports. Many people have talked to us about the tutorial program as an example of that. We've consolidated our METCO liaisons from 4 positions to 2 across the 8 schools. We've reduced our professional development and materials and supplies budget. I believe materials and supplies by 10%. I don't know the percentage on the professional development reduction, but by $62,000. And in this spending plan, unlike the other, which actually enhances the enrichment and challenge support program, that program is eliminated. I won't skip through those. I will talk for a moment about this. We've documented in the superintendent's message, which is again available on our website, a number of efficiencies that have been taken over the last decade. We focused that discussion on our home services model, which I talked a little bit about earlier, custodial services and transportation. I will say this, that one issue that gets pointed out to us all the time is about, where are these efficiencies? And a great example that I've offered a number of times is the example of our kindergarten and first grade paraprofessional model, which was clearly meant to focus our paraprofessionals at the grade levels where we thought they were most needed and where we thought that later on they wouldn't be necessary, right? It would lead to students having supports in those grade levels. It was actually originally meant to be second grade as well. And the model, used in a number of different districts, suggested that if you focused at those areas, you would eliminate the need for paraprofessionals to be written into students' IEPs and eliminate the need for them to have them in 4th, 5th, 6th grade. The truth of the matter is that's happened. The truth of the matter is also that we actually haven't reduced the number of paraprofessionals because we've grown. So it's the wrong question to ask where's the efficiency and where's the savings. The right question is what did you save that it would have cost you given the enrollment increase? And the enrollment increase would have driven quite a substantial increase in the number of paraprofessionals had we continued on with the same model. So the fact that we're actually still spending about the same amount of money is an efficiency and is a savings. So we tried to document some of that in the message. So Mr. Rowe, I'm going to turn this over to you now to talk about some of the other data that we
Great. And what we've done tonight is we've actually separated this into really 2 slide deck presentations. And the first one is the one that the superintendent just ran through, which talks a lot about the programmatic content. And the second one that we want to go through now summarizes the allocations of dollars so that you can get a sense of how this plays into our growth over the last 3 years, or comparing the no override budget to the override budget. So first, to just begin, you see an allocation of expenses, expenditures, and revenues. And what you see is with the no override budget, we would have resources of a little over $94 million to expend in the general fund for FY16. And that distributes across 1,112 positions in major areas as we've grouped them. The orange is what we call instruction, which is our teachers, our aides, and our coordinators, exclusively high school and 7th and 8th grade, programmatically at the K-8 schools. The second group, which is kindergarten and elementary, is the purple, 234 positions, and that's teachers and aides in our K through 6 grades. Then we have 40 positions, senior management, principals, assistant principals, and managers. That's the red slice. And then the blue slice we call support, which are positions such as guidance, clerical, custodians, medical, psychological, etc. And finally, what we call mandated, which is our special education and our ELL services. So you see that that's 343, or 30% of the total. Again, those are the numbers which you can actually read, I think, on this slide better than the first. And again, it's $94 million in proposed for FY16 in the no override plan. The additional $12.9 million is our grant funds and our revolving funds as proposed for FY16. You notice that grant funds are down in the $150,000 range. This is primarily because we're expecting, at least in this model, a reduction, a partial reduction in kindergarten and some other softening. Although what we've heard from the governor is he's proposed a complete reduction of the kindergarten grant, so that would be more significant if the timing were such that the final outcome from the legislature has a deeper cut in the kindergarten grant. Again, revolving funds, the projection is up. The 3 major revolving funds we have are our early childhood programs, where we're proposing an increase in the tuition revenues, and our food service program and our adult education program. So those 3 really represent the lion's share of that $7.3 million. although there are some other smaller ones, such as our athletic program. So let's take a minute now and look at the side-by-side comparison of what we would expect to see for next year in our override budget versus no override, so that the override numbers will be on the right-hand side, the no override on the left-hand side, so that you notice that the significant difference is approximately the $5.2 million difference from the override. Well, it's probably closer to 5.4. What happens, you notice, in the town appropriation is it drops by 682,000. That's the cuts that have been made to the municipal budget to shift resources to the schools in the case that there's no override, so that the town appropriation is 3.9 million, where in the override plan we would get 6.2. So the net is the net of those two numbers, and the town appropriation drops to 3.2 million. And then the other change, of course, is, as the superintendent said, we wouldn't do the significant fee increases to some of the partner programs that participate in our schools, so that the resources available for next year, this is the first year of the override, remembering that there'd be additional resources raised that would be used in our second and third year, the concept being that we'll get override resources for 3 years, FY16, 17, 18, and this is the plan for FY16. So that the side-by-side shows that on the right-hand side, the summary of all the proposals that the superintendent went through in terms of the details earlier. What you'll notice, just starting at the top, the collective bargaining, the 1% versus 2%, is approximately a $766,000 difference. Steps and lanes are the same in both plans. Regular education contingency is the same in both plans. What I've described here as special ed contingency is $10,000 difference in the two plans. I've summarized the $375,000 that we're setting aside for contracted services in special education, along with the $100,000 contingency in the override plan. That's the $475,000. And I've summarized the same $375,000 that we're setting aside for private placements, along with $110,000 referral contingency that the superintendent referenced a few moments ago, as the $385,000 in the no override budget. We would put aside a benefits contingency in the override budget. That's partly to deal with the increase in positions that we'll be adding with the override. We need to make sure that we're holding aside dollars relative to the additional impact that they may have on the town budget, where benefits are actually budgeted. There's a process through what we call a town school partnership, where dollars first are taken off the top before the school department gets its appropriation, and those dollars go to a central account that's managed by the town. Given the growth that we're proposing in the override, we believe that a piece of what would otherwise be a direct allocation to the schools needs to be set aside in order to deal with what we expect to be additional benefits costs from the positions that we would be proposing. You notice the grant contingency. Again, it's the same in both proposals. The technology budget, you see the contrast between the no override at $336,000 and the override at $726,000. The override component of the technology budget would include two positions, a digital learning specialist and a data manager that we wouldn't be able to fund in the no override budget. The enrollment growth, which are the classroom positions, elementary and the specials, as well as the first grade aid, are, you notice, the same in both proposals. Enrollment-related, these are the additional resources that the superintendent laid out the detail. They summarized to 10.4 in the override and only 4.3 in the no override budget. Again, special education, as we've grouped them, is $971,000 in the no override and $1,200,000, 16 positions versus 21 positions. We wouldn't be able to fund the student services positions, 5 of which are the RTI in the no override budget. Again, the high school wouldn't include the additional regular education resources. We're setting aside $50,000 for athletic program in the override budget, 2 central administrative positions in the override budget, 1.9 positions to enhance our current elementary enrichment and challenge support program, known as Gifted and Talented to many people, so that there's additional staffing included in the override budget. You'll notice below where we list our proposed reductions that there's actually a reduction of the existing program. That's the 4.25 for enrichment and challenge support, from enrichment and challenge support, which would be eliminating that program. In both proposals, there is support for the Devotion Building Project. There's additional administrative support in the override budget, and the devotion at Old Lincoln School allocation is larger due to the full-time guidance counselor and the vice principal that are part of the override proposal. And then looking at the reductions down below, the consolidations of the elementary classrooms would eliminate 5 positions. The high school would also lose 5 positions. Professional development would be cut. We'd eliminate the Richmond Challenge support. Supply budget would be reduced, and we would be reducing 2 positions from our METCO budget, so that the net change in the override budget, the no override budget, is an addition of 23 positions and $3.9 million added to our budget, where the override budget is an addition of 69 positions and $9.1 million added to our budget for next year.
So,
sure,
Peter, let me, just in the interest of time, because we'll probably end up coming back to these.
I just want to say the detail behind each of these groups is after. We can look at those slides or skip them,
Great.
depending on what you want to.
So let me do 2 things and then sort of open it up to other questions. We had a couple questions that were sent in ahead of time. I want to try to address those, and then some questions I've been asked the last day or so about how this actually gets implemented, because that's been an area that some people have asked us about. So one question that we received was about someone's belief that the governor had proposed a reduction to METCO, and how were we going to address that. The governor actually hasn't proposed a reduction to METCO, but what we've said throughout this budget discussion is that the METCO allocation of the last number of years, even though the governor has proposed funding it at FY15, last year's level, has gotten to the point where it's very small, and it pretty much supports staffing. It doesn't support the kind of programming for students that it did at one point. And so, as we've had growth in the cost of those positions, not in the number of positions, we've had to look very carefully at potentially making a reduction in the number of those positions in next year's budget. But I want to be really clear that the governor's proposed a level of funding for METCO that is equal to the FY 2015 number. The second sort of area was really around what's in this. Could we differentiate in this between what's growth related, what's enhancement, new initiatives, those kinds of things. And the essential answer to that is it's growth. So, I suppose that reasonable people can have a conversation about whether the technology plan is growth or whether it's enhancement. The fact is we had a technology budget at one point that was keeping up with essentially, I think, a 4-year replacement cycle for staff. It wasn't allowing us to do what we were trying to provide each and every classroom with, and that got outstripped by the number of people that we needed to bring on to keep up with enrollment growth. We have a number of areas here that we call enrollment-related. The fact of the matter is that our literacy specialists, our math specialists, have all been outstripped by our enrollment growth. And even areas that we've talked about here saying, well, this is an enhancement, which, by the way, I would say is nothing more than an improvement of existing services, we believe are put in place in order to be future efficiencies. I talked about the RTI model in regular education, which is really designed to address students' needs before they qualify for special education, and thereby over time reduce those costs as well. The other question that we received ahead of time was really about how we measure the effectiveness of programs. And we're really proud that I think it's now for 10 years, we publish a school district report card. we have district goals, we have measurements against those goals, and we publish how we do against those goals each and every year for the public to see. It's on our website. We make print copies of it, and we distribute it. Beyond that, programs go through a rigorous program review process. I'll tell you that not many districts have such a process where they take programs and after every X number of years, put those programs through a review process, which is what just happened with ECS, and why we're seeing the kinds of recommendations that we're seeing after a group sits and studies, looks at what's happening in other districts, looks at what's happening in terms of the data around that program, what's going on across the country in an area like gifted and talented. That was very important for them, and then proposes changes. Sometimes those are reductions, sometimes those could be elimination, sometimes those are going in a different direction with a program, but sometimes, like the ECS program, they're proposed enhancements. And so we're pretty proud of the program review process and the district-wide report card that we publish every year.
I just wanted to comment on that. We're presenting on the FY16 budget tonight, but to your point about efficiencies, one of the documents that we've shared with the Overhead Study Committee showed the pattern of our spending in special education from the period of FY10 through FY14. And it showed the stability and the fact that that total budget was growing in line with the total budget. The total special education budget was growing in line with the total budget of the organization. And that was very stark contrast to the years before because of the management actions that we had taken, which we believe is efficiency. It's effectively spending the dollars that we have available to us, which I think proves your point. The other piece that I think is fair to point out was, again, and the Overhead Study Committee confirmed this, was in looking at the per pupil cost of the school department, again for the period FY10 forward. Because once we added the longer school day and once we added elementary world language in 09, when you look at per pupil cost forward through FY14, those numbers in a couple of years actually trailed downward on an adjusted basis, so that it really speaks to the fact that we were not able to put more resources into our programs than we were struggling to what we called catch up. And that really became the source of how we put our original presentations together when we worked with the Overhead Study Committee to make an argument that we felt we needed to be putting resources into many of these areas. So, and those slides are available if Big wants to invite us back for another presentation on either our enrollment history or the history of some of the efficiencies in our spending patterns over time. So we'd be glad to do that.
Thanks, Peter. The last thing I'll say, and then we'll open up to any questions that are here, is a question I was asked today, as recently as this afternoon, which is how do you implement this? So you have both of these plans. You aren't going to know what you're doing with this till May 5th. How do you implement? And it's very complicated. Because at the same time that we have to, let's take the elementary positions, that's probably the best example of this. At the same time that we're talking about possible increases at certain grade levels, we're also trying to identify first where those consolidations would be. So we've started through a pretty rigorous exercise with our principals to try to determine where we would do the least harm in those grade levels around some consolidation. So we're looking at numbers of students, experience levels of teachers, numbers of students who are ELL, English language learners, numbers of students on IEPs, numbers of students in free and reduced lunch, and we're factoring that all in to a decision about what those consolidations might be. But I need to be really honest here and say it will absolutely hold up the hiring that principals have. The example one person asked me about today is, what if in our building we know we have an opening in this grade? Can the principal move forward in the next month and a half and fill that position? And the answer is no. I mean, the answer is we can try to make some contingency plans, but until we actually know what information is in front of us in terms of what sections we might have to cut, where our true additions are, what the licenses are of the people who be impacted by this, and by the way, in the scenario I've laid out, that's these elementary teachers and these ECS teachers who also have elementary licenses. It's very complicated in terms of actually moving forward before May 5th with any of that hiring. And so that's a further complication that our principals are going to face as they try to hire people to replace retirements and those kinds of things. And that's not answerable. That's just something that we're going to have to deal with between now and May 5th in however this goes, whether these additional revenues are available to us or not. So with that, we'll do that. So if we have audience members who have questions, we're happy to try to take those. We're going to look at the screen and pay attention to whether we get phone calls. And I'm going to ask you to use the microphone if you have a question, so we make sure Big can pick up your question. David. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is David Knight. I've lived in Brookline for approximately going into my second decade. So Brookline historically has had a commitment to public education. If the override doesn't pass, what would keep all of these teachers from applying out and looking for new jobs immediately? And my second comment is the kindergarteners that went to school today in Brookline, there were approximately 703. Is that correct?
Yes.
So this is only March 17th. What I've seen in Brookline, the most people register for kindergarten in the summer or late in the school year and into the summer. Are there any projected figures, or I guess you can have them, but
No, we can.
But it always seems to grow every year. So that 703 number, it's conceivable that could go to over 800.
So let me do this first. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you. So the 703 are kids who are presently in seats, right? So I'll take your question a couple directions if that's okay. So what we know is that there are fluctuations during the year. We know that some of those fluctuations are more at certain schools than others. But we can't monitor every month because it just doesn't make any sense to monitor every month. We know we've cracked 700 for the first time in this growth pattern. What we also know is that when we compare first grade to kindergarten, we have growth, to your point. So we believe, based on our history, and we didn't bring that slide tonight, but we have a 13-year history slide that shows this is what happens to a group from kindergarten through 12th grade on average, right? And we know that our kindergarten grows into first grade. We know that. It's happened whether the kindergarten was 650 or whether it was 420. They grow, right? So that 700 on average is going to be larger by the time they're in first grade. It's going to be larger. So your other question was about the incoming class for next year. And what we've said to the school committee is we're going to give them actually their first report on those numbers at our March 26th meeting. Usually we've given them a number by now. But you've probably noticed that we've had an interesting winter. And so we had 16 kindergarten registration sessions scheduled, and 6 of them were canceled. So we're not counting on those numbers right now because even the ones we had 5 feet of snow. It's hard for people to come out with little kids and register. So what we know is that our offices have been inundated, our Office of Student Affairs, inundated with kindergarten registration. So we're catching up. And we believe by the 26th we have a number that we can actually share with the school committee and that you can actually begin to compare to previous years. And I can tell you that number's significant. It's much higher than I thought it would be at this time given the winter that we've had. It's higher. Most of our, one thing I want to correct that you said is most of our registration actually does come in that February time period. Most of it. But it's a significant number between then and the beginning of the year. You're absolutely right. We may be normally around 500 in that February time period, but we pick up another 150 to 200 kids right in that other time period. That's a lot of kids. And what we know, because you asked the question, I'll take it as a jumping off point, right? We know that the profile looks different. That's the other piece that we know. We know that we register more ELL students in the summer than we do in that February time period. We know that, even though the numbers are increasing overall. And so the profile looks a little bit different. The one last thing I want to say about that just struck me about a statistic, because I don't think some people here understand some of these numbers. and understand what they look like compared to a Brookline that they think about. So I got a report from our ELL coordinator today that said there are 400 students, and they actually think it was 422 students in our schools right now who are not from U.S. schools, who didn't move here from another place in the country as ELL. These are ELL students, but moved from, and those are up. Those numbers are up, and they're up dramatically. So we're seeing a change in the profile. We've documented that in At School in Brookline over the last number of years. We're seeing a real change in the profile of the school system, which has different needs, translation, those kinds of services that I talked about earlier. Your first question, so we've tried to guard as much as we can against that. This is the question about teachers leaving, right? So we had a really exhaustive conversation with the school committee around why certain things weren't in the proposal for this year. They're actually in the proposals for next year. Great example, I think, that addresses what you've asked is elementary world language. So we knew that if elementary world language were part of this reduction package for the no override budget, that we would lose teachers whether we had additional revenues available to us on the 6th or not. Now, Bill, why do you say that? Because their license is very narrow. They're licensed in world language, right? And if there aren't other jobs in this district at the middle level or high school, and there probably aren't, then they're going to say, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to wait here till May 5th to see if I have a job. There are 2 districts that I know of that are opening programs. I'm going to go there and I'm going to apply and I'm going to get a job, right? So we could have very well been in a scenario where we would have been here on May the 6th saying we have additional revenue available to us and we lost 8 elementary world language teachers, right? So what we did is we postponed that decision to year 2. We said in our budget presentation last week that we believe a back of the envelope kind of a calculation shows that our shortfall for next year is at least 1.3 million. And I can tell you the elementary world language program would be part of that package. But in terms of other teachers, I don't have data on that from other districts, but the anecdotal evidence is that teachers are nervous. Teachers are looking at these kinds of things and saying, while we're saying very openly, we don't know that whether anyone will actually lose their job. We don't know that because we do have a certain set of resignations every year, and there'll probably be jobs open. The fact that you don't know where you'll be assigned, will it be at the Lincoln School or is the job available at the Lawrence School when this all gets done, makes people nervous and makes them pay attention to where there may be other jobs. And we expect that might happen as a result. I hope I answered your question.
You did, thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Yuki.
Hi.
I'm Yukiko Ugozi. You mentioned differences in staffing level for the upper devotion at the Old Lincoln School, and could you elaborate on the differences between the 2 budgets?
Yeah, there's 2, and there are really only 2. I mean, what's in both spending plans is the staffing, right? I mean, when we move 7th and 8th grade, very predictable, I'm sure for you, the social studies teacher, the science teacher, the math teacher, they go over, the special educators, they go over. What the 2 differences are, and it's really based around a philosophical difference that we had to adopt between the 2 plans. In the override plan, we took the approach that we were planning not for next year, but for the following year, right? We're planning for when the 5th and 6th graders are there. So the steps we're going to take are not about next year. They're about when we have a school of 5 through 8. So it's a full-time vice principal, right, which allows the principal next year to focus as much on the transition of those 5th and 6th graders. And it's a full-time guidance counselor instead of a half-time guidance counselor. That's it. Those are the differences. As I said, really the one proposal is focused on a 2-year sort of vision of it, and the other is focused on a short-term, we can only do what we absolutely need to do for next year kind of approach.
And in addition to those 2 staffing items, there's a $40,000 professional development fund that we're not able to put into the no budget for the devotion planning.
I will say one other thing about this. I mean, in both spending plans, it might confuse some people, but it's another part of the nature of a growing school system. So we have more people traveling than ever before between schools. We have more people traveling than ever before between schools, and that's a function of growth, right? And that's complicated, and I guess some people would say it's not efficient because we lose part of their day to driving and worse yet, parking, right? You all understand that problem more than I do. So we lose part of their day. So we've actually had to factor in, you'll see in the budget message, for those people that travel between the two schools, between upper devotion and lower devotion, if you will, we've had to factor in a 0.1 to assume their travel and their parking, because we can't assume they're a 1.0 and that we can schedule them as if they're a 1.0. We have to schedule them as if there's something slightly less. That has become more common for us, and I'll tell you, as we experience more and more parking woes, I'll say, associated with the growing schools, we're having to do more of that. More than your question, but. Anything else? Sure.
Hi, Naomi Schweitzer. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
So under the no override scenario, I'm just trying to paint the picture of what it would look like for all our kids, but as a parent of a third grader, will be fourth grader next year.
Yes.
So thinking about that grade level, but maybe you could also help paint the picture for a choice of maybe the lower grades or the high school. I'm seeing that the class sizes are 26 to 29, and I'm seeing the enrichment challenge support program being cut, and I'm seeing less specialists. And my current experience of the specialists and enrichment challenge support is they pull kids out, but they also push in to the classroom. So what does the daily life of the teacher and the kids look like with those changes?
Well, remember that in this plan, thanks for the question, in this plan we did leave the literacy support. The literacy support looks the same between the two proposals, but you're right, it is essentially one of the few things that does. So a couple things about the specifics of those 5 positions, if you will. They will be in grades 4 through 8. We actually still have the enhancement of the sectioning in K through 3. So we don't believe class sizes in K through 3 look any different. And in fact, as we've begun our discussions with principals, they've all been about 4th through 8th grade. We've tried to focus a little bit more in the last couple days on some of the middle grades, because quite frankly, there, we don't have some of the problems that you laid out in your question, in that it's a matter of just larger sections, not just larger sections, but larger sections. But there are a number of supports, right, in terms of math and what we think, and you've probably had a chance to read a very exciting vision for what ECS can bring, not only to those students who are somewhere in those tiers, but also to the entirety of groups of students. We actually believe, if Jennifer Fisher-Mueller were here with us tonight, she would say that we actually believe that proposal really helps drive some real instructional change in the classroom for every child. For every child. And so we won't be able to do that in FY16. That will be postponed till down the road somewhere. And the fact that the difference are so stark around those ECS proposals, right? Enhancement of the program to meet those needs versus elimination is quite troubling to us. So there are some significant differences. We were asked the other day, and Peter actually, I thought, ventured a pretty good comment on this, because our job is to make this work, right? And that's what we're setting out to do. Would we look at using some of those dollars that we've used in the contingency around referral? Would we look at those to provide some support in those 5 classrooms? We might. If we thought it would eliminate some of the need for referrals, which we know are coming, we might do that, because in the end, our mission, our job, one way or another with these proposals, is to make it an outstanding learning experience for each and every child. So we're gonna use those dollars and take a look in that in a way to do that, because you're right, starkly looking at a budget, it doesn't feel that way. I think we can do 1 or 2 more. They told us we're here for an hour, and we'd love to try to answer some other questions if anyone has anything. We do have other budget forums scheduled. Well, first of all, let me say that I have a number of superintendent forums scheduled at schools. I think, every day through the next month or something like that it runs. And we have another one of these, not scheduled here. And again, we want to thank Big for hosting us here, and we hope to do more of this in the future. I think it's a great partnership for our district and for our high school students in particular, and the great experiences they get out of the partnership we have with Big. But we have a budget forum. I think it's at the Baker School, and I believe it's scheduled for next week. If anyone would like to attend that, we'll be there that night. So I want to thank you all, thank people for coming out, thank the Big staff for hosting us. And again, I'm Bill Lupini, Superintendent of Schools, with Peter Rowe, our Deputy Superintendent, and thanks for tuning in.
Thank you very much.